Hello, listeners. Welcome to Random Deep Dives into whatever tickles our fancy, or our du toff, a podcast where we take random deep dives into whatever tickles our fancy. I'm Grace.
And I'm Peter. Hello.
Hello, Peter. And this is our second episode. We made it 200% further than we got with our first attempt at a podcast. I have a good feeling about this. In today's episode, we are going to be continuing with our Avatar The Last Airbender Netflix adaptation deep dive by taking a deep dive into episode 2, Warriors, in which we meet the warriors of Kyoshi Island. I am really enjoying seeing different locations in the world of Avatar. Peter, what did you think of this episode?
Oh, I liked it. At this point in the series, I think they kept most of the story the same, I think. And the stuff they added so far I was pretty happy with. But we can dive into that in detail. I'm
Hmm.
keen. What did you think overall?
Yeah, I really liked this episode. Like after watching episode 1, I was like, yes, this is nostalgic. I'm quite liking the vibe of this adaptation. And then in this episode, I was like, oh, okay, we're going to Kyoshi Island already. I'm pretty sure in the original we didn't go there quite so quickly, but I'm up for it. I really like the Kyoshi Warriors, and I like, I'm fascinated by Avatar Kyoshi, so. I overall very much enjoyed this episode, and I'm very excited to dive into it.
Yeah, Kyoshi Island was actually one of the earlier episodes in the original, but I think it's a very memorable episode. That's the other thing. So I think it sticks out. And I remember years ago, and I actually went back to watch it all in order, the Nickelodeon series. I was actually surprised. Oh, Kyoshi Island's one of the really early episodes. But
Ah.
it's so memorable, it sticks out. Like, yeah, I forgot that it's that early.
Interesting. It is really memorable, isn't it? I think the Kyoshi Warriors are just really memorable as a organization. Are they an organization? They're warriors and they're protectors of their island. I think organization doesn't really do them justice.
Technically, yes, but yeah.
Yeah. Oh, you're right. It's episode 4 in the original series, so it is very early on. The adaptation is really following, so far, the trajectory of that season 1 of the original. So let's go back to the start of the episode. The episode opens and Katara, Aang, and Sokka are still at the Southern Water Temple, and Aang has just come out of that very quite frightening Avatar state where he's sort of gone into the Avatar state quite involuntarily when he comes across Gyatso's corpse and he's overwhelmed by grief and he comes out of it. And at the start of episode 2, Sokka's all ready to like go back to Wolf Cove, the water tribe, and leave Aang. But Katara persuades Sokka that they will continue to journey with Aang because she feels that that is their greater purpose. That is how they will protect their village and save the world. And from a personal perspective, she really feels that by following Aang, she can become a waterbender. She's already feeling her waterbending improving. And so she manages to persuade Sokka that they will continue to journey with Aang. And it's actually at this time that she discovers the waterbending scroll in her bag. I thought this was a really nice touch. This is when we meet Momo as well, I think. So Momo's like scrabbling around in her bag and like looking for food. And then Katara discovers the ancient waterbending scroll, which Gran snuck into her bag just as they left the southern water tribe. I liked the detail on the waterbending scroll. When Katara unscrolls it, you can see some really lovely detailed sketches of waterbending movements. And I also loved that the writing on the waterbending scroll it wasn't in English. It was in this inscription that looked quite like runes.
Yes.
So I thought that was a really nice touch.
Yeah, me too. It would break the immersion if I think if I saw just English text there, but I really liked seeing the that script. I'm not sure what script that is, if it is a script. Now I'm suddenly thinking about it. I'm curious how they came up with that. But I
Yeah.
thought it looked really cool.
I thought the scroll looked really cool too, and I loved like I think little details like that really make or break world building. And I am curious as well whether it's a script based on a real life language or whether it's completely made up.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
yes, I think it would have ruined the vibe a lot if it was in English and it sort of said you could see words saying lift your arms up, kick your leg out. Yeah. So, yeah, any thoughts on that before, well, they leave the Southern Air Temple pretty soon after that.
Yeah, there was one thing that they added here where, if you remember in the Nickelodeon series, I believe they decided to travel with Aang very early on because in that first arc, it goes Aang's in danger. They got to go rescue Aang, and when they do, they kind of hastily decide they're going to travel with Aang because their destiny is now entwined with Aang. If I remember correctly, it was along those lines.
Mm,
And in the Netflix series, they've kind of split that up where they say Aang's in danger. This was in the first episode. We got to go save Aang. And then now, after Aang's not in danger, they have to reassess. You
mm,
know, did I just save Aang and that's it and I'm going home now, or am I traveling with Aang? You know, do I have a bigger
mm.
part to play in this story? I think that's a nice touch because it makes them really question what they're doing and then make a firm decision to press on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was a good touch. It reminds me of like, and I'm sure this is done in many stories, but it reminds me of like Lord of the Rings when Samwise Gamgee, well, they get to Rivendell and they're saying, "Oh, let's go home now. We've carried the ring this far. You know, we're done now."
Mm.
And
Yeah,
then they
yeah.
all of a sudden, you know, they realize, no, I have to keep going. There's more that needs to be done, and I have a role to play.
Yeah, yeah. I really like that analogy, and I think it makes a lot more sense in terms of the logic of a person's decision making. Like it's not quite realistic for someone to commit, the foreseeable future to a world-saving mission. Just, in a single decision, it takes time to sort of adjust to that the gravity of that decision.
Yeah, it's a big
Yeah.
decision.
It is, yes, to follow the avatar and attempt to save the world. Yeah, I agree. I think it makes more logical sense to have them reevaluate why they are following Aang.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes, so then they're all on Appa, and I just wanted to take a moment here to kind of appreciate the special effects of Appa flying, like the scene where they take off from the Southern Air Temple and Appa launches into the sky. I think it's really well done. Like Appa looks great. Moment of appreciation for Appa.
Yeah.
Okay, and then we actually cut to Uncle Iroh and Zuko, and they are at a portside market, and they're gathering. They're trying to. Well, Zuko is trying to gather information about the Avatar, and Uncle Iroh is trying to gather information, but in a more subtle way. And he's also being very distracted by the food on offer at the market, in particular the sticky rice. I thought this was a really nice exchange. It actually reminded me a lot of the dynamic between Zuko and Uncle Iroh in the original, with Uncle Iroh being a lot more lighthearted. So I liked the humor
Yeah,
in this scene.
me too, definitely. And I would be distracted by sticky rice too.
Yeah, yeah. I kind of wish they showed a bit more of the market. And it's pretty soon after this that we meet Commander Zhao, who is he's one of the primary antagonists of season one, right?
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, there's going to be a lot of spoilers in our discussion. He's one of the primary antagonists in season one.
Well, yes, he was in the Nickelodeon series. I'll say no more about the Netflix series, but
Okay.
um, yeah, Zhao was interesting. I thought he was quite different in this Netflix series compared to Nickelodeon. But what did you think?
I'm keen to hear your thoughts because obviously I can't remember as much of Zhao in the Nickelodeon series, but I thought, as soon as Zhao came on screen, I thought, oh, that's a really interesting choice of casting. The actor was very familiar, and then When I looked him up, I realized the actor is Ken Leung, and he's very familiar because he was in Lost. He played Miles in Lost, and he also played he was in Rush Hour with Jackie Chan, and he was one of the villains in Rush Hour. And I think he's a very interesting choice for Zhao. He adds an interesting dimension to the character because I think that Leong is he's very pan-faced as an actor, and he has this expression when he speaks. It's sort of his expressions don't sort of match the words that are coming out of his mouth. So he comes across as quite insincere, I think, and he has this sort of almost almost dead-eyed or snakish sort of expression to him, which makes you feel a certain level of suspiciousness when he's talking. So I think that added an interesting dimension to Commander Zhao, which I don't think he came across as in that way in the original.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I also knew he seemed familiar. So now
Yeah.
that you point those other the movie and series out, I realize, oh, okay, I have seen him before.
Yeah.
Yeah, he is exactly like that. I thought he was much more sinister in this Netflix series. He's
Mm,
got a
mm.
lot of a sense that he's plotting something. He's hiding something.
Yes.
And I think while the Nickelodeon version had a bit of deception in some of his decisions, his behavior and the way he carried himself was much more of I guess a cartoon villain. He was more aggressive, confrontational, likes
Mm.
to, a bit of a bully, I suppose, to Zuko. Whereas here he's almost like half sucking up to Zuko while kind of, underhanded,
Yeah.
got a
Yeah.
bit of a grin on his face or a bit
Yeah.
sarcastic when he when he speaks to Zuko, whilst also, technically sucking up to him because Zuko is a prince, blah blah blah. It's
Yeah.
I liked
Yeah.
it a lot. It's a very different
Yeah.
character, but I thought he was very entertaining, and it made him seem more like a threat, because he's plotting something. He's about to do something underhanded. It's more of a threat. It's sinister, and I
Absolutely.
like that as well.
Yeah, I think he was a great villain. He's a more interesting villain because he is unpredictable, and you kind of get the sense that he has no honor, that he will do like he'll do anything to get ahead. It doesn't matter whether it's honorable or whether it's sneaky or sly or underhanded or betrays someone. He's kind of got that vibe that he doesn't really care about the morals of his actions, and so that makes him much less predictable as a villain. And yeah, maybe the original Commander Zhao was more straightforward and perhaps a bit more brutish. And I like that you use the phrase cartoon villain because that does make him a bit more of a straightforward, predictable kind of antagonist, whereas Zhao is a bit slimier and a bit more like yeah, I think that unpredictability makes him a more interesting villain, doesn't it?
Definitely. There is only one thing that, because they've changed his character, there's one episode which doesn't work, and it was removed for the Netflix series. So,
Ah.
so it ended up just not seeming like an issue. But that episode is where Zhao's aggressive behavior and his lack of restraint is addressed. And it's all about firebending this episode. This episode is about Aang trying to learn firebending, even though he's not ready. He's trying to learn the elements out of order. And there's consequences for that. And Aang ends up burning Katara, and he realizes that firebending is really dangerous and it needs restraint, and he needs to learn them in the correct order. And then he uses that knowledge when fighting Zhao to basically just provoke Zhao and not throw any punches. And the more he provokes Zhao, the more Zhao gets angry, and Zhao ends up burning down his own ship.
Ah.
So I thought that little episode there it doesn't work with the new Zhao, but it
Yeah.
has a bit of an important role in explaining why Aang has to learn the elements in the correct order.
Yeah.
And so without that, it does feel a bit like there's an unanswered part of the world building. Like
Yeah.
why does Aang have to follow this strict order? So that is a little detail that I think would have been good if they found a way to weave back into the story, but that was the only little gripe
Mm.
about Zhao's character.
That's very interesting. Yeah, I can see how that doesn't work with the Ken Leung version of Zhao. And you're right in pointing out that we haven't really explored much of Aang learning the other elements yet, although it is only episode 2, and we'll touch on this in further future episodes. But the question of how and when he learns the other elements is perhaps not so explored in season 1. So I'm curious to know how they're going to weave it in future episodes, hey?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay, so we've met Commander Zhao, we've seen where Uncle Aru and Zuko are, and then now we get to go to Kyoshi Island. And we're going to Kyoshi Island because Aang wants to find out more about Avatar Kyoshi, who I think is Avatar Kyoshi the very previous incarnation of the Avatar, or is
No,
she a couple back?
prior to Aang, it was Roku of the
Yeah.
Fire Nation, and then Kyoshi
Uh,
of the
yeah.
Earth
Okay,
Kingdom.
gotcha. Thank you. So she's two incarnations back, but Aang wants to learn more about the Avatar state and try to control the Avatar state before he hurts anyone else. So we get to Kyoshi Island. It looks awesome. We fly in, we see the giant statue of Avatar Kyoshi looming over the island, and I think it's a real treat to be able to visit this island in the adaptation. I wanted to take a moment to appreciate the costumes as well at this point in the adaptation. I'm really liking the costumes, like the little details of Katara and Sokka's Water Tribe costumes. I think they're done really nicely. I've noticed their necklaces and the braces on their arms really bringing to life how they were drawn. Moment of appreciation for Aang's collar, like it stands up so nicely. And despite all his airbending, his collar looks very perfect. And a big moment of appreciation for the Kyoshi Warriors costumes. I think they were done really nicely, like the makeup and the green, the subtle green of their gowns, which was like not a uniform green, but I noticed that there was kind of different shades of green in their gowns, and then I think it looked like a leatherish kind of armor overlying it. And then their headbands. I don't know if you noticed, but if you look closely, they each have slightly different gold headbands with slightly different designs. And I thought that was a really nice touch because they didn't really, I'm not sure, like they didn't really have to design different headbands for each of the warriors, but I thought it was a really nice detail that they did that. So I just wanted to appreciate the cool costumes.
Yeah, I didn't notice that about the headbands actually. That is really impressive. Rather than just the same headband for everyone, which wouldn't have necessarily been bad, but that's a really cool detail
Yeah,
to show
yeah,
that
I thought
there's
so.
more going on here. There's like
Yeah.
there's a team of warriors with a structure. They probably have specific roles within their organization. So
We need to stop
it's
using that word.
cool. That is very cool, and yeah,
Yeah,
the
it did.
costumes are very cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're right. It does make you wonder what the meaning of those headbands is. It makes you wonder at the hierarchy of the team, the warriors, and their different roles. So I think just little touches like that really enhance the world building, right?
Yeah, definitely. Um, I actually have a bit of a tangent, because,
Yeah,
and
go for it.
this
Love
is about the
tangents.
Kyoshi this is about the Kyoshi Warriors, because when this series was in development, there was some statement along the lines that they were going to explore more side characters. And I actually, when I heard that statement, I was imagining my imagination went wild. I thought, oh, wouldn't it be cool if like one of the ones is the Kyoshi Warriors? They're introduced early on. In the Nickelodeon cartoon, they do come back in season 2 and 3. So they do have a thread of story going on there. And it is told that they go on their own adventures between the times that we see them. So
Mm.
I thought it would be really cool to almost weave in two separate teams going on two separate adventures. The Team Avatar in one, the Kyoshi Warriors in the other, or something like that. And I imagine they could even do the same thing again with another character, Jet, who is a repeating character in the Nickelodeon series. We haven't seen him yet in the Netflix series, but I imagine this kind of wider world building that I thought would be really cool. They haven't quite done that, but the little touches here that you've mentioned about the Kyoshi Warriors reminded me of when I imagined that. Maybe it was maybe it would have been too big a budget. I don't know.
I wonder if it would have. I think that sounds really cool, but it may also have detracted from the main story, which is Aang, Katara, and Sokka's story and the main narrative. But I agree. It would be really cool to have like a spin-off story about side characters, especially the Kyoshi Warriors. Like if they did a spin-off series in the vein of Disney's Star Wars, like in the vein of The Mandalorian or Andor, I'd be all in for that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, back to the actual
That wasn't
discussion of
too
the
much of a
episode.
tangent. Bring on more tangents. Okay, so they're at Kyoshi Island, and initially, the guardians of the island. So, um, Suyi and her mother are uncertain about letting Aang, Katara, and Sokka visit the island, but eventually they're granted through Aang's, genuineness and through his, I think, charisma and his way of connecting with people. He manages to connect with the inhabitants of Kyoshi Island, and they're granted 48 hours to visit and to look through Avatar Kyoshi's books. And so so Aang and Katara get to look through Avatar Kyoshi's old things. And this is a short scene, but I liked this scene. I think it's very interesting to get a glimpse of Avatar Kyoshi. I think her backstory is very interesting. We hear that she was an orphan and she lived in poverty until she was taken in as a maid to I assume, a more well-off family. And she eventually becomes the Avatar, finds out that she's the Avatar. And I think she becomes quite a fierce and Avatar who's perceived as very strong-willed, quite a warrior. We find out that her motto was "Only justice will bring peace," which I think conveys a lot of Avatar Kyoshi's vibe. So it does make me very curious to learn more about Avatar Kyoshi. She's quite a fascinating character. I know that there have been some Kyoshi origin novels written by the author F.C. Yi. There's two novels. One is called The Rise of Kyoshi, and the second one is called The Shadow of Kyoshi. And they delve quite deeply into Kyoshi's origin story from when she was a child into her years as an avatar. And FCE is a great writer, and I think the novels are really highly rated. So I hope to visit those novels one day. What do you think of Avatar Kyoshi?
Yeah, well, I haven't read those novels, so my knowledge is actually limited to just the original Nickelodeon series. But I think Kyoshi is a very interesting character because she is so uncompromising, and she's, as you say, very much a warrior. And because of that, she's very, very different from Aang. Aang is always looking for compromises and peaceful solutions, and Kyoshi is the opposite. So later on in the episode, Aang has that conversation with Kyoshi. So jumping forward a few scenes, and Aang asks Kyoshi for advice about being the Avatar, and Kyoshi really lays down like harsh truths about like the people who will get hurt if he fails, and just Aang's role to be powerful, to deal out judgment. And that was it was really intense. And it was an interesting choice to have Kyoshi tell Aang about the role of the Avatar, because Kyoshi's perspective is quite different not just from Aang, but each of the past avatars has a very, very different perspective. And so starting with Kyoshi really sets a certain high stakes, almost like stressful tone for Aang that wasn't there in the Nickelodeon cartoon, where he didn't talk to Kyoshi directly until much later.
Ah, really? Okay, so that encounter that Aang, in this episode, Aang meets Kyoshi in the spirit world, that conversation actually doesn't happen till later in the original.
Yeah,
Ah,
there's a scene actually towards almost the end of the entire series where Aang talks to Kyoshi, and that some of those things, like for example, the phrase "only justice will bring peace," that was said by
yeah.
Kyoshi in that scene towards the end of the cartoon. It's been brought forward to be written on her. Was it like an engraving or something?
Something like
Um,
that, yeah.
almost like a like a motto. I don't know if that's something that's talked about more in the books. That would be very interesting to read. But yeah, in this one, they really brought it forward and hammered it hammered it into Aang.
Yeah, yeah, that you're right. That scene where Aang speaks to Kyoshi in the spirit world was super intense. Kyoshi pretty much lays into Aang, doesn't she? And
Yeah,
she's like, "People are gonna, people are gonna get hurt if you don't do anything." Um,
yeah,
Being an avatar means being a mighty, merciless warrior.
yeah. And Aang looked like such a stressed 12-year-old boy in that scene.
Yeah, I know, which is fair enough. I think he has very, legitimate reasons to be a stressed 12-year-old boy. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. So we're on Kyoshi Island, we meet Kyoshi, and we also get to meet Suyi, who is I think she's sort of the leader, right, of the Kyoshi warriors. She's sort of running the training and she's sort of guiding and leading the warriors. And I'm really happy we get to meet Suyi because she, along with Zuko, is actually another of my favorite characters from the original. And I do enjoy how she is portrayed here. Uh, she's got a fierceness and also an awkwardness and a bit of naivety as well. And her whole character seems quite shaped around being a warrior and a guardian for her people. So I'm enjoying how Suyi is portrayed here. I do admit that the romantic scenes between Suyi and Sokka feel a little bit contrived and as though they're on, double speed. But I'm happy to roll with it for the sake of narrative progression.
At the risk of sounding pedantic, I have to correct. The name is Suki, but
Oh, so sorry. I got that wrong.
no, that's all good.
I thought I had that wrong. Suki.
um, But anyway, I do agree that I liked a lot of her character. She's a warrior. She's very cool. I like her character a lot. I agreed with what you said about the romance being a bit odd, a bit
Mm,
awkward. I think back to the Nickelodeon series again, where I found Suki more of a she was more playful. She had more fun. Um, for example, when Sokka is being really condescending and arrogant, and that was the other thing is Sokka was in the cartoon. He was very condescending, very arrogant towards Suki and the rest of the Kyoshi warriors, and she ends up basically making a fool out of him, beating him in hand-to-hand combat, and she laughed at him because it was a bit of a confrontational relationship at first, not a romantic one. And then Sokka humbled himself. He learned from Suki, and they ended up sparring together. And that was the build up of their relationship, which had a lot of what I saw as growing respect for each other. And then
mm.
only then at the very end of the episode, after all of that, was it revealed that Tsuki actually had a bit of a thing for Sokka, a bit of romance there. And that came after all this build-up, which I thought made it seem more like, well, more natural, I suppose, because they have that period after Sokka humbles himself, they have that growth,
Yeah.
and then the romance. And I thought I liked that more than in the Netflix series with just like a lot of just staring at each other,
Yeah.
like intense, awkward staring.
Cut scenes
That
of
yeah,
staring.
it was a bit odd.
Yeah, I guess that's the advantage of a TV series too, right? You do have a bit more time to develop those dynamics of the relationship, and I do like that sense of it being confrontational at first, and then the growing respect, and then the romance developing. I feel like they tried to include tones of that in the adaptation, but it was much more fast-paced and kind of not as well explored, I think. Um, and also, I think they had to definitely tone down Sokka's misogyny for the adaptation.
Yeah, I think so. I think no, they definitely toned it down, and I can see why they would have to. Yeah.
Yeah, yes. So, okay, so we're kind of getting to the action stage of this episode. Commander Zhao, and shortly after that, Zuko and Iroh on their ship arrive at Kyoshi Island. And Commander Zhao kind of gets to the island first, and he approaches the inhabitants with his contingent of soldiers in quite a confrontational way. And it's an quite a tense conversation that he has between um, Commander Zhao and the leader of the Kyoshi Island. I don't think we actually get to learn her name, which is a little bit of a shame, but she's fantastic. And quite soon after that, a battle erupts between Zhao and his men and the Kyoshi warriors. It's a great battle. We're thrown straight into the action. Zhao's men are, throwing their bolts of fire, and the Kyoshi warriors are just doing their thing with their golden fans and just defending their people in a really awesome way.
Yeah, it was a cool fight. I liked a few things in the fight. I liked how the older lady, the leader, again, I don't remember if they gave her name, but
I don't think they named her, which is a shame. Yeah.
yeah, she also fought a bit, which I
Yes.
thought was really cool because I imagine that she's maybe like a former Kyoshi warrior, that maybe she's older and she's retired and now she's in a leadership position for the whole village rather than a warrior. But when this happens, yeah, she can pick up some fans and fight as well. I thought that was cool. I thought it was also cool. The fans are made of metal, is that right? I don't quite remember
I
now.
assume so. They look like they're made of metal because they look gold and they look quite shiny. So I assume that they are able to, like, they seem to deflect air and fire.
Yeah, I thought it was cool that it's a way to actually deflect fire because that's a very
Mm,
hard. Uh, it's not like hand-to-hand combat or swords where you can block very easily. Fire burns a lot. So I thought it was very cool that they have that ability to fight back against the fire. And I also thought it was really cool how Suki and Sokka fought together. Um, Fighting and combat and action scenes. I love it when they use that for storytelling.
mm.
And having two characters fight together and have really good teamwork, for me, that's a great way to see the characters actually kind of growing in terms of their relationship with each other. So I like that as well.
Yeah, I like all of those details you pointed out. I always like it when narrative is told in other ways that aren't just dialogue, and through action and especially through combat. I think is yeah, such a fantastic way to develop character and to develop narrative. And yes, I really loved that the leader of Kyoshi Island, you know, whipped out her fighting skills, and she did more than just a little bit of fighting. I think she was like fully, you know, flinging Zhao's men into the air.
Yes.
She was great. Okay. So while that battle is happening in the main part of Kyoshi Island, Zuko and Uncle Iroh um, figure out that Aang is actually more likely to be at Avatar Kyoshi's shrine. So they sneak around and they climb through the forest to hope they're hoping to sort of ambush Aang, and they're right in their assumption. Pretty soon, Zuko spots Katara, um, and Katara has to sort of muster up her courage, and she actually comes forward and confronts Zuko. And so she looks very nervous, but she stands there blocking his way, and she's ready to waterbend. And I thought this was a really interesting confrontation. I think it's the very first, although Zuko and Katara have seen each other at Wolf Cove in the Southern Water Tribe, this is the first time that they're actually battling. And Katara's waterbending skills are obviously still quite undeveloped. So it's quite a short-lived battle. She throws a few of the firebenders onto the ground, and then Zuko quickly overpowers her with a few fire bolts, and she falls into a sort of hollow beneath a tree, and Zuko advances on her. It's an interesting confrontation because I kind of sense that Zuko doesn't actually want to fight Katara. He sort of gives her the chance to run away, but then Katara stands her ground. Zuko overpowers her quite quickly, and Katara's also overwhelmed by a traumatic flashback of her mother's death. So it's quite a poignant scene and a moving scene with many different layers in this initial confrontation between Zuko and Katara. And it's the first confrontation of many, I think, between the two characters.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said. It's very poignant having the that flashback, um, and showing how Katara's skills at this stage are quite undeveloped. It sets
Mm,
up the growth that she's going to have, and then you have Zuko as well. As you say, he didn't seem like he was trying. He didn't want necessarily to fight her, but he also makes it clear that if she stands in his way, he will fight her, and he's not going to hesitate. And it's interesting to again show that his character is not necessarily bloodthirsty or evil, but he is very, very determined to get his goal, and showing how he's desperate to get the avatar for the reasons that are explored in this series. It's again going back to that, I think.
yes, we love desperate, angsty Zuko. More of that. Yes. Okay, so then, of course, I actually kind of forgot about this happening. So I thought this was super epic when it happened, but Aang channels the incarnation of Kyoshi. Um, so this is something that can happen when the avatar is at the shrine of a previous avatar. So Kyoshi is actually channeled quite bodily into Aang, and he transforms into uh, Kyoshi, Avatar Kyoshi, with all of her bending powers. So he's Kyoshi now, and he can bend all the elements, and her eyes are glowing in this really awesome, epic way. And Kyoshi pretty much rises up and saves Katara, storms into the battle with Zhao's men, and does her thing, channels like a water whip and like whips the men around and channels like air in a hurricane around her. Um, this was a really cool scene and
Yeah,
had quite some iconic imagery of Avatar Kyoshi.
yeah. So before I go into how cool and awesome that scene looked, um,
I feel like
a bit of background.
I feel like half of this episode is just me going, this was so cool. That was so cool.
I mean, it was a really cool episode. Um, so a bit of background. When you say that you don't remember this in the Nickelodeon series, that's correct. It didn't happen.
Mm.
At least not in this episode, not in the Kyoshi Warriors episode. There is another episode about a different village where they remember Kyoshi in a very different light because she's a warrior. She's very uncompromising. They see her as a villain, and Aang has an encounter with that village, and a lot of stuff happens there. I won't go into detail, but Kyoshi does manifest in that one, not necessarily to fight, but to make a statement. She actually gives a speech, and
Mm.
in a way, I think they brought that kind of power, that part of the world building about like the fact that Kyoshi can do this, and that imagery. They brought it into this episode, and then they've added like the really incredible action scene of like showing what a fully fledged avatar can do. Because Aang is not by nowhere close to a fully fledged avatar. He is powerful already at this stage, but when you see Kyoshi using all her powers, it's one of those scenes which is almost like, on the one hand, amazing because she's fighting bad guys, but also kind of like terrifying because it's that much power in the hands of one person. It's incredible, and you almost see on their faces this simultaneous like awe. Like I think might have been Sokka and Suki and Katara just looking in amazement, and they look kind of like they're really happy, but also scared. It's an incredible sight, and I thought that was just a wonderful way to show that power of the Avatar in glory
Mm.
and in terror.
Yeah, yeah, I like that they made it amazing and epic, but also they made her terrifying because she was scary, like especially with the way they shot the scene, some close-ups of her face, and the sort of glowing eyes made her quite terrifying, which yeah, I think that was nicely done, that her power was terrifying. And she was super like OP, right? She it's kind of nice that they had the limitation that Aang can't just channel the incarnation of an avatar anywhere. It can only happen at a shrine, at the shrine of that previous avatar. It did make me wonder like how far he could take it. Like if he ventures, a certain number of kilometers from the shrine, will the
Yeah, a
incarnation
range
just
limit.
collapse? Yeah, exactly. I guess we won't
Maybe
know.
it's like maybe it's like when your phone Bluetooth or something gets to its range limit and it starts getting real choppy. He walks far
Yeah,
away and it keeps like flickering between
it just
Aang and
glitches.
Kyoshi. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah. That makes sense to me. Uh, okay, so Kyoshi basically saves the day, and then she disappears once, Zhao has fled with his men, and Kyoshi Island is safe. Everyone is happy, and that sort of brings us to the end of the episode. I guess the only final scene that I thought would be worth mentioning is this small scene where there's a conversation between Zuko, Iroh, and Commander Zhao. And Zuko's like, don't tell anyone about the Avatar. Please don't tell anyone about the Avatar. And you can hear his desperation to keep it a secret.
Yeah.
And then, of course, immediately we switch to this scene where Zhao is writing a letter. Quite a elaborately written, sneaky, sinister sort of letter. And the letter finds its way to its recipient, and we see the recipient unscrolling the letter, and we pan up. We see this elaborate red costume, and there's the big reveal of Fire Lord Ozai. So Zhao has leaked the return of the Avatar to Fire Lord Ozai himself. This is a pretty cool way to end episode 2. Not only do we see Zhao's immediate betrayal and his sort of sneakiness, we also get Daniel Day Kim as Fire Lord Ozai in this rather epic camera pan up. He looks terrifying, imposing, but also charismatic, I think. And you can see that he has a lot of like gravitas to him. He's standing in this room in this rich red robe with fire all around him. So I think it's a great way to end the episode. Really kept me on the edge of my seat. I just realized that Daniel Day Kim is also from Lost. So we have two actors who previously appeared in Lost. Anyway, yeah, that's the end of episode 2. Did you have any final thoughts about the episode?
Yeah, one more thing. I made a note about the last scene where we see Aang, and it's where he's about to leave the village, and there's a big scene where they're all thanking him. And I think it comes back to the theme of like what Aang is doing. He is saving the world, yes, in a physical sense, like with all the power that we just talked about. But he's also there, like almost a symbol. I almost say he's like almost like a religious symbol to this universe where
Yeah.
he's there. People look to the Avatar for wisdom and guidance and hope. And I think it was a nice touch to have that closing scene to explain how Aang's presence here, despite all the the conflict and the danger that he's brought, he has brought them a bit of a reinvigoration of that hope and the faith in Kyoshi and the past Avatar and the present Avatar, and it shows that he's saving the world in more ways than one. That's at least that's his goal, right? He's not just a physical person there to like a superhero defeat evil, but he's there to inspire people
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and
Instill hope.
bring back that hope. Yeah,
You reminded me of two things actually, two further comments. One was just that scene where the inhabitants of Kyoshi Island, they all bow to Aang. I always find scenes where people bow very symbolic and very moving in different ways. I think bowing can be moving in different ways, but when they all bow to Aang, it's very moving as a gesture of their respect, and also the hope that they're placing in him, as you said. And then after a pause, Aang also, there's this expression that comes over his face. It's an interesting expression. He looks happy, but not so much that he's being, he's not like it's not like he's craving their servitude or their humility or anything like that. He's just looks happy that he's made a connection with them. And then he also bows very deeply. And I felt really moved by that. I think there's something about bowing and then also bowing in return that is something quite emotional. I feel like it's something that isn't conveyed, cannot be conveyed in words. It's conveyed in that body language of bowing your head very low. So I really liked that bowing scene. And I'm sure there may be more bowing scenes that we will talk about in the future as well. I'm already thinking of one, but we'll save that for the future episode. But yes, I also like, just as you outlined, I also like characters that aren't so much traditional heroes in the sense that they're not conflict based. They actually shy away from conflict, and they are heroes in different ways. With Aang in particular, I think we're starting to see that he's a hero in his goodness and his way of finding non-conflictual ways of solving problems and forging connections and empathy and hope as a way of driving change and healing and bringing the world together. So I feel like that's one reason why we all love Aang as an avatar. Like his different way of solving problems is makes him a very likable character.
yeah. I think you've put it really well, and I definitely agree. So yeah,
Cool.
I'm happy to close on that very nice and heartwarming note.
Yes, I think that's a very warm and fuzzy note to close this episode on. Awesome. Okay, so that brings us to the end of episode 2. Thank you, dear listener, for joining us for another dose of R Do You Toff. We hope it exceeded your expectations in every way, or at least met them. From now on, we are actually planning to cover 2 episodes of Avatar The Last Airbender Netflix adaptation in each podcast episode. So things will accelerate a little bit, but it will be equally thrilling. So next time we will be delving into episodes 3 and 4. We look forward to seeing you there. Bye bye.
Bye, everyone.